All right, friends, it's time to get started. Today we will be talking about facility planning. And if you recall, one of the earlier chapters discussed the managerial process, and then we discussed managerial theory. And planning is the beginning of that managerial process. Planning certainly is an important skill that all managers should have, really must have, because it drives everything that we do. Sound planning leads to sound execution. Certainly, good planning involves a great amount of time and certainly a high amount of effort. And the planning process can be a way to accommodate for an organization's long-term needs and their short-term needs, a way to carry through that vision. And here, what we're really looking for is sustainability, how that facility is going to be utilized both short-term and long-term. And planning really just is about the appropriate allocation of very few and certainly precious resources that an organization has so that the facility's success can be ensured. One of the first ways to kind of make a decision of how an organization is going to proceed from a planning process perspective is whether or not there's going to be a collaborative decision-making process, sort of that uh, management by group, or is it going to be one person or a limited amount of people making that decision? Certainly, an organization can also choose to hire consultants through outsourcing or working with independent contractors. And really, it's up to you as the manager to discuss with other stakeholders and decide what approach makes the most sense. So, if an organization is planning to work with an existing facility, make renovations to an existing facility, then that's really going to be focused on what are the current uses, but then also future uses of that building. So things to consider might be coordinating maintenance schedules or personnel or looking at how the facility is used on a daily basis and then also what sort of events and games are being staged and looking at the ancillaries in terms of concessions and maintenance and sanitation and things of that nature. So what we're really looking at is monitoring the existing conditions, but also planning for the future. In terms of planning for a current facility, areas of chief concern are going to be the financial aspects, the monies, expenses, revenues, accounts receivable, payroll, what are HR looking like from a financial standpoint, and then also from a personnel standpoint, what sort of hours are people spending in the building from an operational perspective? Who's working which events? And then making sure that for the future facility upgrades, trying to figure out, well, what sort of personnel needs do we have? Who do we need to hire? Who do we need to train? So the HR issues that we talked about in the prior chapter come right into play. And then, of course, scheduling, making sure that the needs of that facility are going to be able to be met from a scheduling perspective, that there won't be a conflict between games and events, or that another facility will not be uh, conflicting or competing with this current facility. And then, of course, proper allocation of space, which we'll talk about both for current facilities and future facilities. We need to make sure that the space for the facility is properly managed and arranged. Sort of one of the biggest issues that arises when you have a building that's being currently used, but also going through a renovation, is how are you going to actually accommodate those who are using it and its operations while still going through that renovation. And the textbook makes reference to Yale's gym, which had scaffolding vertically placed. That was the way that it was renovated. However, it led to some structural issues because the renovations used pretty heavy equipment, and a crane was so large that the facility's authorities were worried that the gym itself would collapse. So it was required that reinforcements were used. So again, there's a need to make sure that the building is operating according to code, according to law, and according to proper best practices for risk management. Now, if we're talking about future facilities, um, then we have some additional issues. We should be asking ourselves, well, who wants the facility? Which stakeholder groups are interested in that facility? And why does that facility want to be created? What's the need? And then we go down the list asking about sort of what are what's the potential financial risk with this facility. So it's always important when you're starting this process by looking at the so-called who, what, when, where, and why questions to really understand what is the need for this facility. You know, talking to internal constituents, external constituents, your customers, your stakeholders, your employees, and then members of the public, potential taxpayers. Um, and then we're going to see issues involving the actual planning would be whether enough money will be available in the future to operate that facility. So money and financial aspects are certainly important. Concerns over budget or personnel. Are there enough employees to actually operate the facility? What will the hours be of that facility from a scheduling perspective? And then space management, making sure that there's enough current space, but then also future space for the future operations within this facility. So allocating time and space for bookings, make sure that that proper space is available. The text talks to us about swing space and growth space, and this is definitely important for space management considerations, whether it's a current facility or a future facility. So swing space is going to be space that would be available to the facility during the renovation process. It could just be a room somewhere that is still open where you could use it to store equipment that the facility uses. And then, of course, growth space. So that's space that's contiguous to the current utilized space, and it allows that business to expand without having to go through additional construction or leasing. So it's kind of built-in space that the organization can grow into. Very important. Other parts of the planning process are going to be, as I said, talking to your constituents. So we've got internal and external stakeholders, and we're trying to analyze what those needs might be. So as part of that planning process, the facility could go through a feasibility study, developing a budget, getting together a committee that's going to be composed of both internal and external constituents, trying to make sure that goals and objectives that are developed as part of the facility are going to be reasonable and realistic, and trying to get a better sense of the marketplace. Certainly, generating community support is also very important in the planning process, and you want to make sure that you're bringing in the right people to make sure that the organization can be successful. So right off the bat, an organization that is interested in putting together or exploring a facility from a planning perspective should create a planning committee. And a planning committee very well could become a political issue, so you need to make sure that there's leaders on that committee who can foster compromise, and that this sort of cooperative process ultimately coming to a compromise can exist throughout the entire planning process. Um, Individuals who might want or individuals who could be good members of the planning committee would be those who can help to gain support for the project. So you want to have broad-based individuals throughout the community. So you want to solicit support of stakeholders who are members of the community. And then also you want to get that input from the community. Um, you could talk to those who are going to give you a diversity of opinions. It could be someone who's in favor of the facility, but they might not be interested in having that facility near their location, near their home. It could be someone who's in favor of the facility, but does not want public funds to be spent, or someone that just supports the facility no matter what, or an individual who's opposed to it. So talking to all these voices and gaining a diverse array of perspectives from a planning perspective can really help with the planning committee's potential success. Although it should be known that there is no guarantee that this will be a smooth process, and certainly it's paramount to convince the public that there is a need for a facility such as this, but that's why that diverse range of perspectives is important. The planning committee should also determine what type of facility is needed, and that would be done through the needs assessment. There's certainly a diversity of stadia that could be used or facilities. There's stadiums, there's arenas, there's gyms, there's sportsplexes. Sportsplex is going to be a multi-sport facility. It could also include indoor and outdoor components. The domes, of course, are stadiums, large buildings that have a dome covering on it. Arenas are going to be a little bit smaller that can host a diversity of events. But probably the most common facility is going to be a community-based sport and recreation center that are just ubiquitous throughout the United States, whether it's rural or city. And when we're going through the needs assessment, the needs are going to be based on the internal demand that the planning committee discovers, as well as elements that are highlighted by potential future facility users, and certainly by the needs of the industry, the sport and recreation industry. So in order to determine these needs, a planning committee can certainly look at data. Now, once the planning committee is put together and that there is a needs assessment that occurs, because the needs assessment will help to drive the desire for stakeholders to put together a feasibility study. The feasibility study's purpose is to answer various questions, and some of these questions are: can the project be accomplished? Or will the project be suitable and successful? Or is the project logical? And certainly the feasibility study is looking to identify the strengths and weaknesses of the planning process. So it could be a strength that the cost is going to be lower than the usual cost of a facility such as this, or a weakness could be that the costs run over than what's typical. But the feasibility study really is looking at if the needs of the stakeholders can be met and what is the cost. And the study can be used as a way to identify any sort of challenges that exist, or what characteristics of a team are needed in order for this facility to be successfully built, or are there future expenses that are going to be needed to be covered after the facility is completed, any unforeseen or expenses. So in this situation, when we're going through a feasibility study, a SWOT analysis may be helpful. So SWOT analysis is where there's strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats are identified. And this is trying to weigh the various factors that can affect your proposed plan for a new facility, and this is going to be both positive and negative aspects. So a successful SWOT analysis is very, very important. Also within a feasibility study, the inputs are going to be what are the prospective owners' financial data, and here we're looking at, well, what is the net worth of the financier or of the owner? What's their income in their debts? Do they have the proper business experience, or is this someone who's never been in this marketplace before? These are a couple of potential questions from the owner's financial perspective. In terms of prospective site locations, what we're looking at is, well, what does the site look like? Are there improvements? Is the topography going to be even, or is there going to be a need to invest money in leveling this area? Is there a large population within a reasonable drive to this facility site? What are the neighboring demographics of this facility? Or what's the neighborhood business in residential area look like? Is there local business to support this and local residents to use this facility? So these are important. And finally, competition. What are the number of facilities in and around this region that could potentially take business away? Um, have other competitors been successful in this region, or has there been a continuous wave of openings and closings of the facility? That's certainly something that can be telling. So these are just some of the examples that need to be included in the feasibility input study. And then the output, we're looking at, well, what are the industry conditions generally speaking? What, from a financial standpoint, are going to be the costs potentially of the facility? And that's going to be not just developing the facility, building it, but then running it for the first 5 years. So, what sort of money are we talking about? What size and scope? What are the revenue projections within the first few years? How many employees are needed? So these all need to be considered as part of that output. And then, of course, how will the facility affect those within the local community? These are all extremely important questions to ask during the feasibility study stage. So this is a two-stage phase for this process. The first preliminary stage is going to be going to the site for a preliminary visit. And then the next one would be examining what is really the feasibility of the user usage for this facility. Who's going to actually use it? How well is it going to be used? And it's going to be based on the background that's provided to the owners. And then you're going to look at the conceptual design plan of the facility. And then finally, the feasibility from a financial perspective. So what is going to be the cost, and then is it within a realm that's going to be financially workable for the ownership group? So the cost of a preliminary study really can be from just a couple $1,000s to over $1 million. So certainly the feasibility ranges in its cost. Now, if there is movement towards an expanded phase, then it gets more in depth. And we're really looking a lot at the economic impact, economic analysis for those who are going to be within the host community. And this is a process that's usually done to justify that that either a sport organization or the officials who are proposing it are making a sound decision. And it's going to be based on the net economic change in a host community that results from those spending money that's going to be attributed to that facility or those events. So it's trying to justify the cost of building this facility based on its economic impact. So like I said before, this is usually a political sort of process and a common way for politicians to justify the cost of this facility because oftentimes public funds are used to finance a facility, are by arguing that there is a net positive economic impact for those in the community. So there's a couple of ways to try to show that there is a net economic impact. So direct impact is going to be actual spending, those actually spending money in that community, and that there's a direct benefit by having that facility. It's tangentially related to the facility. So it could be that people are buying uh, products such as hot dogs or concessions or tickets to go to that facility, or maybe if it's a community facility, paying memberships to participate or to play in that facility. Another one would be indirect impact, and that's going to be the ripple effect from additional rounds of spending. So that's going to be someone is going down there to work, and that the organization or business is going to be paying that person wages for them to work there based on the demand for that facility. So if someone goes to work at a restaurant in a that's located downtown and it's busy because sporting events are taking place at that arena downtown, and that person was actually hired to accommodate for that increased demand um, because people are down there to watch the game. That would be the indirect spending. Now, there's also um, other elements that kind of uh, cut against the economic impact, and that's going to be redirected spending and then displacement. So redirected spending is that it's money that would have been spent on other entertainment in the same area. So you can't necessarily claim that building this facility directly led to the spending on a ticket if that money was going to be spent on entertainment in the first place. So I was going to go watch a play or a movie, but instead I'll get a bleacher seat at the baseball game. So that money was going to be spent anyways for discretionary entertainment. Displacement is going to be a portion of hotel rooms that would have been full regardless of whether or not the hotel or the event took place. So that, again, that's similar to redirected spending. And then induced effects are going to be a multiplier effect in visitor spending being recirculated to the community. So that's going to be less negative, and an argument that this money that's being spent is people are spending more and more money in hotels, in restaurants, in parking costs, in in public transit, maybe because they're going to an event in restaurants. And the potential in terms of how during this phase of the study, um, it's often common for discussions to be had as to how that facility is going to be financed. And a facility, especially a public facility, can often be financed through bonds. A bond is a debt obligation similar to a loan that a government or municipality takes out that's funded by a tax or a levy that the elements of the public end up paying. So a sin tax can be used to finance a bond, and a sin tax is going to be where a percentage of a tax is put on things like cigarettes and alcohol that society deems as undesirable characteristics, or a travel tax where to finance a facility, a percent tax can be levied on um, rental cars or hotel rooms, because the argument would be people who are living and enjoying that facility aren't often going to be renting cars or hotel rooms. That's going to be outside people. So kind of sticking the cost of this to build this facility on someone else. Other ways to finance a facility are through private financing, like equity, giving ownership stake in that facility, or corporate bonds, similar to a, a, a governmental bond, but it's a private corporation. Usually the corporations give a little bit of a better interest rate because of the greater likelihood of a potential default. And then private loans. That's also a potential avenue. And then finally, revenue bonds, maybe loans or bonds that are generated by future revenue of facilities. So these are all potential methods to fund a facility. There's been a trend over the last 30 or so years for public facility or public funds to be used to fund these stadiums, and it's led to some sort of backlash because of the opportunity cost that billions of dollars over the years could have been allocated to other projects that probably would have more greatly benefited the public good. So that's something worth keeping in mind. Other aspects of the planning process include concerns related to legal and governmental entities. So zoning issues, potential property tax issues, trying to understand from a planning perspective what the city and county authorities are going to want out of the facility, and what's the cost of that facility from a tax standpoint, and what zoning would need to be changed. Public records, mortgage histories or liens, easements. Easements is going to be a government grant of way that a facility owner is going to get to the facility in the event that private property that someone else owns needs to be crossed. So again, more legal aspects. The Army Corps of Engineers might need to be involved for permitting process, and then building permits may also need to be given. The entire project, once a facility planning process goes this far, really needs to be sold. Once there's a concrete idea and a plan and a way forward, and it is feasible, and all the major questions are answered, the stakeholders and those on the planning committee really need to develop and sell the future of this plan. So advertising it through conventional campaigns, billboards, newspapers, word of mouth, social media, you name it, you should go for it, because when there's large amounts of money that are being spent, especially if it's public and it requires some sort of public vote, selling this plan is going to be incredibly important. Now, once this process has all gone through, the planning committee may wish to create a business plan, and step one is really going to be about looking at your plan and your organization as a living entity that's going to grow and change as time goes on. So you need to define and determine what the business opportunity is for your facility, and know that this opportunity may grow and may change over time. An operational plan should be made, and it should cover things like the facility and improvements to the facility, the geographic location. It's going to highlight really how the facility is managed. Then a marketing plan needs to be created using marketing analysis as to how the plan is going to be marketed to the masses. A business structure should be developed in the sense of, well, what's the corporate sort of way that this business is going to operate? Will it be a traditional corporation with shareholders, 10 shareholders, 1,000 shareholders, 1,000,000? That's a good question. Or is it going to be more like a limited liability company with fewer corporate formalities to adhere to and fewer owners? And this really impacts how the organization is going to operate from a corporate perspective and the taxation of those involved. The next one is going to be defining your resources. What type of resources will be used? Then the financial plan should be worked up, and that's going to look at the financial management of the entity from a budgeting perspective. And once the business plan is completed, it really should look to be straightforward and detailed. So the other sort of aspect is going to be, once you understand how the building is going to be financed, you need to look at the cost of capital, the price total to be purchased for the facility and other materials. What are the ramifications with borrowing money from both a real cost perspective and a political perspective? And the political ramifications of whether you're going to own or lease a building. Certainly owning a building is going to be more advantageous, because that facility will have rights to all kinds of revenues, less restrictions. But if it's leased, that means there'll be less of a financial burden on that company that's leasing it, but there'll also be less opportunities to fully maximize that facility because that facility is not going to be owned. So, kind of looking back to what is going to be the goals of that of that building, and looking at what's important to the stakeholders is also going to be important. So, kind of as a summary, the planning process is really going to entail the following. You're going to run as a manager the operations of the facility on a day-to-day basis. And from a planning perspective, those who are involved in the planning process should look at what type of facility will allow that organization to meet those needs and objectives. And once ascertaining those needs and objectives, the organization can work to justify why that building should be constructed or whether it should be leased. And it's also important to determine what type of facility is needed to justify the need for that facility. So again, reaching out to your stakeholders and really thinking what's important to the goals and mission of your organization. So I hope that this was a good chapter from a planning perspective, and we understand the different aspects that go into planning such a building and the different elements that go into a feasibility study, the importance of working with good stakeholders and getting on the same page, and really talking to anyone who can impact, both from a positive perspective and a negative perspective, your facility. Thank you, and have a good day.